Episode 1. A man enters their world. Rachel and Emily had always been close, despite the usual sibling rivalry. Growing up just 2 years apart, they shared secrets, laughter, and dreams. Rachel, the older of the two, had always been the responsible one. She had gotten married young to Tom, her high school sweetheart, and was now living a comfortable life with him. Emily, on the other hand, was the wild spirit, carefree, independent, and not in any hurry to settle down. She had always admired Rachel's stability, but loved her own freedom just as much. Their lives were separate in many ways, until one day, an unexpected person entered both of their worlds. It started at a family gathering. Rachel and Emily were at their parents' house for Sunday dinner when Tom's friend, David, arrived. He had recently moved back to town after spending years abroad working as an architect. He was strikingly handsome, with his tall frame, sharp features, and easy smile. But it wasn't just his looks that drew attention. It was the way he carried himself, calm and confident, with an air of mystery. Rachel had always known about David through Tom, but this was the first time she had seen him up close in years. Emily, however, had never met him. As the evening wore on, both sisters couldn't help but notice how magnetic David was. His deep voice carried across the table, and every word he said seemed interesting, even if it was about something mundane like his work or his travels. As the night went on, Rachel found herself glancing at David more than she intended to. She quickly brushed it off. After all, she was happily married. Or at least, she told herself that. She had to be. Emily, on the other hand, was openly captivated. After dinner, she found herself drawn into a conversation with David on the porch. They laughed about shared experiences of travel, and Emily felt a spark, a connection she hadn't felt in a long time. When the evening ended and David left, both sisters lay in their separate homes, thinking about him. Neither spoke about it, but they had both been struck by the same realization. They were drawn to the same man. But for Rachel, it was something she couldn't admit, even to herself. Episode 2. The Unspoken Tension. Over the following weeks, David became a frequent presence in their lives. Tom, David, and their friends would often get together for barbecues, drinks, and outings. David was always there, effortlessly charming everyone around him. He was single, and seemed completely unaware of the effect he had on both sisters. Rachel began to notice a strange tension between her and Emily whenever David was around. Emily, with her carefree attitude, didn't hide her interest. She openly flirted with David, making him laugh and drawing him into playful banter. But Rachel? She watched from the sidelines, her heart tightening with feelings she didn't want to acknowledge. One evening, after a small gathering at Rachel's house, Emily stayed behind to help clean up. As they were finishing the dishes, Emily casually mentioned David. "David's really something, isn't he?" Emily said with a smile, trying to keep her voice light. "I've been thinking I might ask him out." Rachel's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to remain calm. "David?" she asked, feigning indifference. "I guess he's nice enough." "Nice? Come on, Ratch, he's more than just nice. He's smart, interesting, and, let's be honest, easy on the eyes." Rachel bit her lip, trying to ignore the pang of jealousy that flared inside her. "Just be careful, Emily," she said quietly, turning back to the sink. Emily raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in her sister's tone. "What do you mean?" Rachel hesitated. "I just mean, don't get too caught up. You never know with guys like him. He's been all over the world, and he probably isn't looking for anything serious." Emily shrugged. "Maybe, but what's the harm in trying?" Rachel wanted to say more, to tell Emily to stay away from David, but she couldn't. She had no right. She was married, after all, and David was free to date whoever he wanted. But as Emily left that night, Rachel's heart felt heavy with a confusing mix of guilt and longing. Episode 3. Lines begin to blur. The days passed, and Emily made good on her word. She started spending more time with David, casually meeting him for coffee or joining him on group outings. Rachel noticed it all, the way Emily's eyes lit up when David spoke to her, the way he smiled at her. It made Rachel feel something she hadn't felt in years: jealousy. At home, things with Tom were comfortable, predictable even. They loved each other, but their relationship had long since lost its spark. Rachel couldn't help but compare the excitement she felt around David to the routine she had with her husband. It wasn't that she didn't love Tom, but something was missing. One weekend, Tom was out of town for work, and Rachel found herself at a gathering with David and Emily without him. As the night went on, Rachel found herself talking to David more than she should have. They shared stories, laughed together, and before she knew it, Rachel felt herself drawn closer to him. Emily, watching from a distance, noticed this growing connection. She didn't say anything, but inside, she felt a wave of possessiveness rise. Rachel had her own life, her own marriage. Why was she spending so much time with David? As the evening wound down, David offered to walk Rachel to her car. They stepped outside, the cool night air swirling around them. For a moment, everything seemed still, and Rachel realized how close they were standing. "You and Tom seem really happy," David said, breaking the silence. Rachel forced a smile. "We are. Things are good." David looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You deserve more than good, Rachel." She froze, her heart racing at his words. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't find the words. Instead, she muttered a quick goodbye and hurried to her car, her mind spinning with guilt and confusion. Episode 4. A Dangerous Confession. The weeks that followed were tense. Rachel found it harder and harder to ignore her feelings for David, and Emily was becoming increasingly attached to him. Emily often gushed about David to Rachel, oblivious to the growing conflict in her sister's heart. One afternoon, Rachel couldn't take it anymore. She invited Emily over for lunch, determined to talk to her. As they sat down at the kitchen table, Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. "Emily," Rachel began, her voice shaky, "I need to tell you something." Emily looked up, sensing the seriousness in her sister's tone. "What is it?" Rachel hesitated, then took a deep breath. I think I have feelings for David." The words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Emily stared at her sister, her expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. "You're married, Rachel," Emily said quietly, her voice trembling. "You can't have feelings for him." "I know," Rachel whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know I shouldn't, but I can't help it." Emily stood up, her face flushed with anger. "I can't believe this. You have everything, Rachel. You have Tom. Why would you even think about David?" "I don't know," Rachel cried. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I love Tom, but I can't stop thinking about David." Emily shook her head, hurt and disbelief flooding her expression. "You need to figure this out, Rachel. But don't drag me into it." And with that, Emily stormed out of the house, leaving Rachel alone, consumed by guilt. Episode 5. A Choice Must Be Made. The air between Rachel and Emily was thick with unresolved tension after their last confrontation. Days had passed without a word from either of them, a silence that felt like an oppressive weight. Rachel couldn't shake the guilt that haunted her. Every time she looked at Tom, her loving husband, she was reminded of her betrayal, not through actions, but through her heart. She hadn't been unfaithful physically, but emotionally, she knew she had crossed a line. Emily, on the other hand, was battling her own storm of emotions. She had always looked up to Rachel, seen her as the stable, strong one, the one who had it all figured out. Rachel's confession had shattered that image, leaving Emily to question not only her sister but herself. How had they both fallen for the same man? And how had Rachel let herself get to this point? David remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil he had stirred. He continued to attend gatherings and hangouts with Tom, Rachel, and Emily, oblivious to the complicated feelings simmering beneath the surface. He noticed the coolness between the sisters, but assumed it was just one of those sibling squabbles that would blow over. He had no idea that the very foundation of their relationship had been shaken. It was on a warm Saturday evening when everything came to a head. Tom, always the social one, had arranged for another get-together at their house, inviting David, Emily, and a few other friends over for drinks and dinner. Rachel had tried to avoid the evening, making excuses about work and being too tired, but Tom had insisted. "Honey, it's just a casual dinner. Besides, you like David, right? You've mentioned before that he's great company," Tom said as he kissed her cheek. Rachel winced internally. She had said that, hadn't she? Now, the words felt like a betrayal all over again. "Yeah, you're right. It'll be fun," Rachel replied, forcing a smile. As the guests arrived, Rachel's anxiety grew. She had been dreading this night for days, knowing that her emotions were far too raw to be around both David and Emily at the same time. She couldn't afford to make a mistake, not tonight. Emily showed up last, looking stunning in a casual but flattering dress that made her look effortlessly beautiful. Rachel couldn't help but notice how David's eyes lingered on her sister when she walked in. It was a look Rachel had once craved but now dreaded. The sight of it twisted something deep inside her. She couldn't stand it anymore. The competing feelings of jealousy, guilt, and confusion were suffocating. Throughout the evening, Rachel kept herself busy with hosting duties, moving between the kitchen and the living room, pouring drinks, and keeping the conversation light. But she couldn't ignore the glances David sent her way when he thought no one was looking. She couldn't tell if he was just being friendly or if he was aware of her feelings. Either way, it added to her internal torment. The tension between Rachel and Emily was palpable. They exchanged polite words, but the warmth that once defined their sisterhood was missing. It wasn't long before the awkwardness became noticeable to others. Tom, in his usual good-natured way, tried to bridge the gap between them by making jokes and drawing them into conversations, but Rachel and Emily remained distant. David, ever the observer, noticed something wasn't right. He wasn't a man to pry, but it was hard to miss the strained smiles and sidelong glances between the sisters. After a while, he made his way over to Rachel while she was alone in the kitchen, pretending to be busy with a tray of drinks. "Hey, you okay?" David asked quietly, leaning against the counter. "You seem off tonight." Rachel's heart raced. Here it was, the moment she had been dreading. Alone with David, without Emily or Tom around to diffuse the tension. She could feel his eyes on her, searching for an answer, and she wasn't sure she could handle it. "I'm fine," she said, her voice tight. "Just a little tired, that's all." David raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "You sure? You and Emily seem like something's going on." Rachel's throat tightened. She could feel the weight of her emotions pressing down on her, threatening to spill out. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face, wondering if he could see the turmoil she was in. We've just had a rough few weeks," she admitted, her voice soft. "Sisters, you know, we don't always get along." David nodded, but his gaze lingered on her a little too long. Rachel felt the heat rise in her cheeks, and for a split second, she wondered if he knew, if he understood the real reason behind their distance. She prayed he didn't. "Look, Rachel," David said, his voice low, "I don't want to make things more complicated, but if you ever need to talk, I'm here." There it was again, that offer of support that gentle understanding. It was the very thing that had drawn her to him in the first place. But Rachel knew she couldn't accept it, not without crossing a line she could never come back from. "I appreciate that," she whispered, barely able to meet his gaze. "But I think I need to figure this out on my own." David nodded, sensing the finality in her tone. He reached out and gave her a reassuring squeeze on the arm before walking back to the living room, leaving Rachel standing alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest. Later that evening, as the guests mingled in the backyard, Rachel noticed Emily sitting by herself, nursing a glass of wine. She knew she couldn't put off the inevitable any longer. It was time to confront her sister, to clear the air, no matter how painful it would be. Rachel walked over and sat down beside Emily, her heart heavy with guilt. They sat in silence for a few moments, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting from the house. Finally, Rachel spoke. "Emily, we need to talk," Rachel began, her voice quiet but firm. Emily didn't look at her, but Rachel could see the tension in her sister's shoulders. "I don't think there's much to say, Rachel. I already know what's going on." Rachel's stomach dropped. "You do?" Emily finally turned to face her, her eyes filled with hurt and betrayal. "You have feelings for David, don't you?" Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She had been hoping to ease into the conversation, but Emily had torn the bandage off in one swift motion. There was no point in denying it now. I didn't mean for it to happen," Rachel admitted, her voice shaking. "I love Tom, I really do. But there's something about David that I can't ignore." Emily scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're married, Rachel. You have a life, a husband who loves you. And here you are, falling for the same guy I've been interested in. Do you even realize what that's doing to me?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't want this to happen. I've been trying to push these feelings away, but it's been harder than I thought." Emily's voice wavered with emotion. "I always looked up to you, Rachel. You had everything, Tom, a stable life, a home. And now you're telling me that's not enough? You're telling me that after all these years you want something more?" Rachel could barely speak, her guilt suffocating her. "I don't want to hurt you, Emily. That's the last thing I ever wanted. But you deserve the truth." Emily shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "The truth? The truth is, you're my sister. And you've made me feel like I'm second best. Again." Rachel reached for Emily's hand, but she pulled away, her face hardening. "I've been falling for David too, Rachel," Emily said, her voice breaking. "But I thought at least you'd be on my side. I thought you'd let me have this." Rachel's heart shattered at her sister's words. "Emily, I never wanted to take him away from you. I swear. Then why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you pull away when you knew how I felt?" Emily shot back. Rachel was silent, unable to offer an explanation that would satisfy her sister's pain. The tension between the two was unbearable, and as the night wore on, it became clear that their relationship had reached a breaking point. As the guests began to leave, and the house grew quiet, Rachel realized that this wasn't something that would resolve itself with time. It needed closure. The next morning, Rachel made a decision. She invited David over to talk, knowing she had to end whatever feelings had grown between them, for the sake of her marriage and for the bond with her sister. Emily wasn't there, and Rachel felt the weight of the conversation as David arrived. They sat in the quiet living room, tension hanging in the air. David, sensing something was off, spoke first. "Rachel, what's going on?" Rachel took a deep breath, her heart heavy. "David, I've developed feelings for you. And it's wrong. I'm married, and you deserve someone who can give you everything without any complications." David looked at her, clearly taken aback but understanding. "Rachel, I never wanted to come between you and your sister, or you and Tom. I know, Rachel said, her voice steady. But I need to make a choice. And that choice is my marriage and my sister. Emily deserves a chance to explore her feelings for you without me in the way. And I need to focus on my life with Tom. David nodded, respecting her decision. I understand, Rachel. And I respect that. With that, they parted ways, and Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. That evening, Rachel sat down with Tom, determined to rebuild the love they had once shared. She confessed her emotional struggles and the feelings she had been fighting. To her surprise, Tom listened with patience and compassion, reminding her why they had fallen in love in the first place. Meanwhile, Emily, though hurt, began to open herself up to the idea of being with David. Their connection grew slowly, naturally, and without the shadow of Rachel's unspoken feelings. Over time, the sisters' relationship began to heal, and while the wounds took time to close, they found their way back to each other. In the end, the bond between Rachel and Emily was stronger than the man who had come between them. Their love for each other, though tested, had survived the storm. And while their lives would never be the same, they had learned the hard way that no matter what, family came first.